I think for months, I thought like, well, this is just the way it is. I don't know how to get myself out of it. I don't feel like I can help myself. I was feeling like absolute shit. I have no choice but to prioritize myself. How do we create change in our life? I think this can be so difficult for all of us because I'm sure every single one of us, you're probably sitting there being like, I know exactly what I would change about myself. Maybe there's a list of things. Maybe there's one really big thing or a bunch of small things or a mix of both. And you're like, God, I know exactly what I want to change. But I feel like I can't get myself to change. I can't help myself. I can't figure out how to step forward. I don't feel like I have the time, the money, the other resources, the support, the, fill in the blank. There's all this stuff that's coming up, and it feels like it's creating a whole bunch of resistance of all the reasons why you can't change. And, I've been thinking about this a lot. I was recently talking to a close friend about this, and they were saying similar things of like, I know exactly what I want to change, but I don't feel like I could actually change. And, I've been thinking about that for all of us. I think when we have the list of things that we want to change about ourselves, or, the thing that always comes to mind is oftentimes related to some sort of like body thing. At least for me it is, and the people in my life, that I've witnessed kind of go through this like really giant need to change. It's either related to exercise, or it's related to food, or it's somehow relates back to physical or mental health. And that's totally been true for me. As my friend brought this to me, and as I've been thinking about this more, I've really been reminded of like, wow, there was one point in my life where I made the most radical change. And that's the story I want to tell today, because I think there's so many things that we could all learn from it. So let me just set the scene for you. I was living in Chicago at the time. I've talked about that before on the show, but, I was making $38,000 a year. I was living in an apartment in Lincoln Park with a roommate. I was, while I was making $38,000 a year, what I was actually doing for my job was managing millions of dollars. So, millions of dollars for brands we all know and love. It's working in advertising. My boss would call in sick every single day for a few months, or every other day. I would wake up in the morning feeling like I didn't know what was going to happen that day, and I didn't know what sort of weight would be placed on my shoulders. And so, I had just moved to Chicago, and that really was the first time that I was like on my own and having to not like sort of fend for myself. That's the only way I could think of describing it. But it's just like, for the first time, I was on my own. I was having to figure out what to make for dinner. I was having to go to the grocery store. I was having to, manage my money in a way where I could afford an apartment, and, I could sustain myself in the city. And also, I needed to build up my savings account as well. So how can I do all of those things? And, with the job I was working in, as strenuous and difficult and taxing and stressful as the job was, it was sort of this like double-sided coin, in that the other side of the coin was that most of my social life was paid for. And when I say that, it's like we like people we would partner with, companies we would partner with would take us to Cubs games, to Blackhawks games, to concerts, to dinners, to happy hours, to lunches, to breakfasts. Like we were fully, resources were abundant when it came to my social life. I didn't have to pay for much when it came to that. But so that's really just to set the scene of like what it was like, and really like every second of the day was spent either thinking about work or socializing about work. And I barely had enough time to myself. And, when I would come back from work, I didn't live in a space of my own. I shared the space with a roommate, and the bedroom that I had at the time, we lived in a 2-bedroom, 1-bath apartment, but like the bedroom that I had at the time did not have a window. So it technically was not a bedroom. It was only big enough to fit a full-size bed, and I had a closet, but like no windows. And so I really felt like I was living in a box. And yeah, so that, just to set the scene, like I was living this lifestyle, and I wasn't taking care of my body. I was prioritizing getting my work done because it felt like there was a bear constantly chasing after me. And because this was the first time that I was fending for myself, and, money felt like the thing that I didn't have enough of. I felt lack around money, but also this need to control, or need to make sure that I had enough money to pay for my apartment and to buy food, to buy transportation, to go back and forth, like to go visit family back home or friends back home. And, because money, I was so aware of the fact that I needed money in order to survive. I think that's why I started to prioritize doing whatever was needed to be done at work before my own needs, because by prioritizing work, I knew I would get money, and then I would be able to cover my food and my shelter. But, that started to backfire a lot. Like pretty much almost immediately started to backfire, but I ignored all the signs. So how that started to backfire was I started feeling sick after eating every single thing. I was constantly eating the same things, and, I was in such a constant state of really just chronic stress that my body just started to retaliate after I consumed like the same foods over and over again. And my body was communicating to me that, hey, we need to stop eating these foods. And I just didn't listen. I would notice it, of course, because I would just feel like absolute shit every second of the day. But, I wasn't doing anything about it. And I think for months I thought like, well, this is just the way it is, and I don't know how to get myself out of it. I don't feel like I can help myself. I don't feel like I have the resources to create change. Like I don't even know where to start. And, it got to a point where one Thanksgiving, I just remember, being at my grandma's house at the time, and we had just finished our meal, and I went to sit down in a chair, and it was like this wave of sickness just like come over me. It was like a mix of my mood suddenly fluctuating. It was a mix of my stomach hurting so bad. And it was like somebody like took my stomach and was like twisting it. I felt so horrible that I remember in that chair right after eating my Thanksgiving meal, when I felt like I couldn't even get out of the chair, I felt so not good. I didn't know what was happening to my body. In that chair, I was like, you know what? I have to ask for help, and I have to start to take one step forward to get to the bottom of like what is even happening. So like at that time I had a general knowing that after every single meal I ate, I felt horrible. Different kinds of horrible after certain meals. But I wasn't tracing that back to any specific food. I think at that time I was like, what I can do is go get a blood test and figure out like what exact foods are causing these sort of symptoms or these sort of feelings. And so that was literally the first step of me even just like researching, how can I get this blood panel done? Like, who does this? What types of doctors do this? And through that, I found a functional medicine doctor. And then through that, I found a functional medicine doctor near me. I scheduled an appointment, which, so Thanksgiving was at the end of November. I couldn't get an appointment until February. And so I scheduled that appointment, and I knew, okay, something's on the calendar and I have a date to where I'm going to start figuring out the answers. And, I think I didn't adjust the sorts of foods I was eating between Thanksgiving and that February. But I think what that span of time helped me do was start to orient my brain around change in general, and specifically having to change my entire diet and my entire lifestyle, because I knew that that was just going to be so massive, like so massive and disruptive in my life that I needed a runway to like mentally prepare myself. Of course, hindsight is 2020, but for me, the first step for my own like patterning, the first step that I take as I move towards change is always research, because I find that the more I fill my brain with new information, new knowledge, the wheels in my brain start turning, and I start to figure out a solution. And that doesn't necessarily mean that I sit myself down and I'm like, I'm finding a solution now. My process is a little bit more drawn out. Like, I do research and then I go off and like do other things and move about my life. And, a day or two later, as I'm going about my life, like the answers sort of just come to me based on the information that I filled my brain with a couple days prior. So, if you're sitting there and you're like, I don't feel like I could take the first step towards change, there has to be at least something that you have going on in your life that you're like so focused on, or you're so motivated by, or you're so proud of. Maybe you're really into fashion and like the clothes that you wear. Maybe you pour a lot of energy into just like feeling really good about the clothes that you wear. What are the steps that you take to find clothes that you love to wear? Like, what's your process in that? And then how can you apply that sort of thing to this other area of your life where you really want to create change? Because I would imagine, let's say you're really into fashion and really into the clothes that you wear. If there's ever a point where the clothes you're wearing start to not feel like you anymore, you start to feel like, this looks a little bit, worn, or the fabric is falling apart, or the buttons are falling off, or, I would imagine that you would prioritize ordering a new shirt, ordering new pants, donating the clothes that look a little bit dingy or dull or not as great as you want them to look. It's like that same sort of energy and evaluation and review and pride that you pour into your clothes is the same sort of skills that you need to pour into making change in this other area of your life. So, going back to my story about how, my first step was making an appointment with my functional medicine doctor. And, it would be over the course of a couple months of, getting the food panel done and getting the results back to understand like, oh my God, I have to cut out every food that I've been eating the most. So gluten, dairy, eggs, soy, green beans, bananas, mushrooms, almonds, peanut butter. And that was sort of like an earth-shattering moment of coming face to face with this list of all the things that I needed to cut out. The time frame that I was staring at with those results was like, I would have to cut these foods out for 6 months. I was like, oh my God, every single meal I eat has to change. And what that also means is like, oh my God, what am I going to eat after I leave this appointment? Like, I don't know what I'm going to be able to eat. I can't think of any other foods that aren't the foods that are on this list that I have to cut out. And so there was this initial sort of anxiety or uncertainty around the fact of like, oh my God, I don't know what my next meal can be. And, in that appointment, my doctor started to become an accountability person for me because I scheduled a follow-up appointment, and he had this whole like treatment protocol of like, you're going to come back every month. I think it was like every month, and we're going to do a check-in and, see how you cutting out these foods is actually helping you. And then we'll tweak things from there. And so, I think having that sort of accountability piece was really helpful for me. And also the fact that I was paying for this appointment, there was like money on the line with this appointment and this whole like journey that I was going down, that I was like, I have to show up. I have to give this my all, and I have to put every ounce of my energy into this. But that came with like a lot of, it was totally an earth-shattering moment. And just, what am I going to eat tonight? What am I going to eat for lunch? What am I going to eat for dinner? What am I going to eat for breakfast tomorrow morning? It's like, so here I was with this like big thing that I needed to change in my life, was like the foods that I was eating. And not only was that affecting, my personal life, but that would also affect my work life, because what I quickly came to realize is that food is such a central part of our culture that, in my personal life, it's how I was connecting with friends. In my work life, it was how I was connecting with colleagues. Like, food is such a central point of connection that I think, while it was definitely anxiety inducing to not know what I could eat for certain meals, I think it was even more daunting to make this change when knowing that I would not be able to connect with people in the same way that I once was able to connect with them, which is over food, which is sharing food, which is going to dinners where we're getting a bunch of different shared plates and being able to eat off of, everyone being able to eat whatever was ordered. It was at the time I had a roommate, and, I was like, shoot, like me making this giant change in my life, I'm now going in the opposite direction of the kinds of food that she eats. And so what is that going to do? I was just like going down this path. And because I lived with a roommate, I was like, oh my God, I have to share a kitchen. I have to share a fridge. I mean, luckily we didn't like share meals. But, when I thought about having to cut all of this food out of my life, in my head, I'm like, fuck, I'm still going to have to stare at that food in my fridge and in my pantry. And I'm going to have to watch my roommate eat it. And I'm going to have to watch every single person around me eat these foods that I can no longer eat. And I'm going to have to sit there and socialize with them and try to maintain these relationships while inside I am absolutely crumbling at the fact that I can't participate in eating the food that they're eating. I'm also going to have to ignore all the free food that just randomly gets placed out everywhere. And on top of that, as I'm being bombarded with all this free food around me, even if I'm paying attention to my computer screen, if I'm diving into Excel, the products that I'm working on advertising for are macaroni and cheese products. They're all products that have gluten, dairy, or eggs in them. And so every single second of the day, I was either looking at food that I could not eat, I was looking at words of foods that I couldn't eat, like the words macaroni and cheese. And it was this constant barrage of just having to face everything that I needed to move away from. And it was so, so brutal. So brutal. And so, these were all the things that started to come up. But, I was feeling like absolute shit every single day. And it got bad enough to where I was like, I have no choice but to prioritize myself. And if I lose friendships because of it, if they can't live with me through, this transformation that I'm about to make, then they don't deserve to be here when I'm on the other side of the transformation. And, and the same thing goes for like coworkers too. Like if I can't eat the food that they're offering, like it, and if that affects our relationship because of it, then I didn't need that relationship in the first place. And so, I was starting to develop, my brain was just going in so many different directions when I got this news of like having to cut out all of these foods. And on top of that, when I initially started floating the idea around to people of like, hey, I'm about to have to make this major change to my diet and major change to my lifestyle, their response to me initially was like, well, you're not going to do that. You're absolutely not going to do that. When I heard that, a couple different things came to my brain, which was, if you tell me I can't do something, you better fucking believe I'm going to do it. And also, the second piece of that was, I think this was the first kind of instance of feeling like, okay, people around me aren't necessarily comfortable with me changing. And so this might ruffle some feathers a little bit. But at the end of the day, like, I literally cannot feel like shit every day. Like, I had to draw the line in the sand somewhere, right? And I had to draw it in a way so that I can make sure that I feel good in my body on a daily basis. But I felt so shitty every single day. I was like, I have to prioritize myself, because if I don't, the cost of me not doing that is my quality of life. and perhaps even my life, because I don't know what this is doing to my body in the long term by me, well, maybe even in the short term or the long term. I don't know what this food is doing to my body by me eating things that my body is constantly rejecting. I'm like, this is dire. This situation is so serious that I have to make a change, and I have to change every part of my life in a way that prioritizes this thing that I need to change. So, how did I do that? I started making a list of every single possible situation where I could slip up, where I would be pushed to my edge and come face to face with this choice of, do you take action in the direction of change, or do you take action in the direction of familiarity and the way things have always been? So what that looked like was like, okay, when what are the times or the situations or the things or the people that really push me to that edge? So it's like being super stressed at work. It's having to work super long hours and then getting out of the office late and then having to figure out what's for dinner. It's not having enough time throughout my workday to eat a proper lunch. So what am I going to do with that? You know, I need to eat lunch. So then what? It was, you know, in having a roommate, it was, okay, what's going to happen when I see my roommate eating, you know, a bunch of bread or a bunch of cheese or pizza? How am I going to approach that situation? Also, the other thing is like, because I'm so busy and because I don't feel like I have a lot of time and because a lot of my energy is focused on work, what are certain pockets of my week where I could plan ahead and meal prep? So, you know, when I'm pushed to my edge, I need to know that I already have food waiting in the fridge for me. I don't have to cook anything. I don't have to make, I can learn how to cook. I could do that on the weekends. But during the week, maybe I don't focus on cooking at all, but I have meal prepped on the weekends so that I have all the food that I could possibly need during the week. Now, going back to the fact that I was making $38,000 at the time, that was my salary, money was also a concern. And, you know, a lot of people talk about, and this is true, where these sort of like specialty foods are more expensive. Now, I still wanted to keep my grocery bill the same. You know, I think I was spending like $100 a week on groceries, maybe like 100 to 120. I still spend about that amount. But, you know, I think what I would do, and the way I worked around this was like, I said, okay, no matter what, I'm keeping my grocery bill the same. And the way I worked around this is like, I just didn't buy the quote unquote specialty foods. And, you know, in the same way that, you know, if we're talking about like fashion or clothes here, right? It's like in the same way you do like high-low dressing. So you're combining pieces that are more expensive with pieces that are less expensive. I was doing that same sort of thing in the grocery setting. Another very important thing that I did that, you know, I was concerned that by having to cut out all of these foods, I would just be constantly faced in having to look at foods that I couldn't eat. But what I was so focused on showing myself and tricking my brain into thinking is like, oh, I'm surrounded by things that I can eat. Or like when I look at a widespread, buffet of food, I'm only noticing the foods that I can eat. And I'm seeing abundance in that. So I'm finding the different things that I can eat out of a sea of a bunch of options. And so the way I started to train myself on that was to, I first started researching because that's my favorite method. I started looking up lists of food, like straight up, like give me a list of vegetables, give me a list of fruits, give me a list of, nuts, give me a list, I Googled that because I was like, I need to understand what options are out there. And then I was like also looking up, do these fall into the category of gluten or dairy or eggs? I was doing all the research to find the foods without the ingredients that I couldn't have. And I started to make a list of everything that I could possibly eat. And so from there, that served as like my library. And then each week, what I would do, and this is literally how the foundation of how I started to create change. Every single Friday night, again, like I was so focused on making this change for myself that I became much more insular and I turned inward a lot. And, on Fridays and Saturday nights, like I wasn't going out because the only thing I could focus on was creating this change for myself because it was so massive. I needed every single ounce of energy going towards making this change. And so what I would do on Friday nights is I would sit in my bedroom with no windows. I would sit on the floor. I remember I had this like cream shag rug on the floor. It was like a very tiny rug because the room was so small. I would sit on that floor. I would get a blank sheet of printer paper and I would start writing out like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, writing out the days of the week that were upcoming. And then I started planning out my meals and I started writing it down and I planned it in a way where, again, I'm only cooking on days and at times when I have time to teach myself how to cook certain things. And so that's how I plan my meals. And then I also would plan them in a way where I was utilizing the leftovers in other areas of the week. So this is how every single Friday night I would plan my meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner for the entire week ahead. And then I would also write out what days in the upcoming week do I have a work dinner, or what day do I have a work lunch and learn, and how can I start to plan ahead and figure out, should I be looking at the menus of those restaurants? Should I, ask to go to a different restaurant because of my new food sensitivities? Should I, skip that lunch and learn? Should I, how can I start to get a strategy in my brain of how to navigate those situations? And how can I navigate it in a way where it's like, I don't feel like I'm missing out on something? These were the things that I started to wrap my mind around of like, okay, here's how I can get 10 steps ahead. Here's how I can think about all the possible situations that could happen. And then here's how I'm going to navigate it so that I can continue moving down this path towards change. Because what I needed to do was do a very clean cutoff of like, One day I ate the foods, the next day I didn't. And, I do want to just acknowledge the fact that, like, for some people that's really difficult to do, and maybe that's not the way you like to make change in your life. But I think for me, as somebody who's like, so it's either I'm all in or I'm not in at all. So I really took this approach of being all in, and maybe you're sitting there and being like, but I kind of have to ease into it, and that's totally fine. And I can understand and appreciate, the need to kind of like dip your toes in the water. And by the way, I think that is also 100% okay. I've been recently learning about this concept of titration, where if you're trying to make a big change, titration supports you in making the change while giving you, doses of familiarity in between. So yeah, it's like take a couple steps forward, you take one step back, and you're like, okay, I'm going to rest here. Okay, let me go out and take a couple steps forward again. Okay, then I'm going to take a step back and rest. And it's like, it's just getting yourself comfortable with moving towards change. Now, that's a very nuanced concept that I just recently learned. So at the time when I was 24, I did not know about that concept. I didn't have the language. I just didn't know. And so, when I think about what really, like, yes, I was up against facing this like massive change of needing to change my life and my lifestyle. I think at the end of the day, what drove me to create that change was this feeling inside of like, I feel like shit every single day and I cannot live like this anymore. And if I want to go to the places I want to go in my life, like, I have to feel good. Like, I cannot live my life like this. And, I think for a lot of us, it does take getting to that point of like, I simply can't go on like this anymore. And it is that rock bottom moment that we need oftentimes in order to create change. Now, if you can start to create the change before you hit the rock bottom, of course, that's ideal. I personally have a really hard time doing that. So oftentimes it does take me getting to a rock bottom in order to propel me to the next level. So, just going back to, I started, literally it was taking, how I made this change was taking one day at a time, one meal at a time, one day at a time, 1 week at a time. And what my doctor also told me to do during this time was like, you need to be getting an ample amount of sleep. Like, sleep is a non-negotiable. You must get more sleep. And so I also prioritized getting more sleep. And what I found is, and this makes sense, is that by me making sure that I had a really good night's sleep, I was able to navigate. So in any moment where I felt pushed to my edge and I had the choice of taking action towards change versus taking action towards familiarity to old habits, if I had enough sleep the night before, I felt much more supported within myself in order to take the action that was towards change. And, another thing that really helped in that was the fact that my bedroom didn't have windows. So I could literally close the door at any time and it would feel like it was pitch black outside. It was dark. So that definitely helped during that time. And also the other really important part of the change that I was making, not only was I getting more sleep, my doctor also required me to get more exercise. And so I had to find time somewhere in my very busy schedule to get a workout in. And so for me, when it comes to needing to do hard things, needing to make a change, I have to stack my day in a way so that I get the hard things done in the morning. Right when I wake up, I immediately do the hardest thing on my list that day. That's the way I like to roll. And so when I was faced with needing to add exercise back into my routine, because to be honest, it had fallen out of my routine at that point because I was just so overwhelmed with work. When I was facing needing to add exercise back in, I was like, well, I have to work out in the morning. And, the way I thought about, there were several days where I would wake up in the morning with every intention of going to the gym, but I would fall back into the whole hit snooze. And I would kind of rationalize it as like, well, maybe sleep is better than working out. And on some days, that is true. Sleep is better, but not every single day. And so I needed to build discernment within myself of like, I can allow myself like maybe one day a week where I sleep in, but one day during the work week where I sleep in, but like I need to get myself into a routine where it's like I wake up, I work out, I go to work. And the way I did that, the way I got myself to work out before work was I said to myself, okay, I need to do 3 things as soon as I open my eyes. First thing, within 10 seconds of waking up, I need to put both feet on the ground. Second thing is I need to stand up. Third thing is I need to imagine a string pulling me forward and pulling me into the direction of the gym or the workout class, wherever I was going. And I would imagine that string pulling me up to get ready, out the door, to get on public transit, to go to the gym, and I would visualize that string pulling me throughout the end of the workout class. And it was almost like this non-negotiable string, right, of just the thing that's pulling me forward. And there's no way of getting off of that string. The string is just pulling me. I don't have to think about it. I just have to know that all I need to do is walk forward. And so that was super helpful in helping me build that routine of working out. So the more I could kind of stack my habits together where I'm like, I'm going to sleep earlier, I'm getting a lot more hours of sleep, I'm waking up early to go to the gym, I'm fueling my body with nourishing foods, like in foods that my body just loves, and I'm pouring really good energy into my body. It started this almost like a flywheel of like only good things. And my entire life started to up level. But in that, it did ruffle a lot of feathers around me. So getting a bunch of sleep, planning ahead, writing everything out for myself, also getting really comfortable with speaking my needs to people by really focusing all of my energy on making sure that structurally, foundationally, my routine and my habits were shifting in support of this change. I was starting to build trust with myself. And so every single day, I started to see the benefits and the good things that were happening because of the changes that I was making. And I started to see those. And the more days that passed, I started to just only see the benefits of me doing these things. And So don't get me wrong though. Like it was extremely, extremely difficult when it came to friends. It was like I, it was like my identity was almost like dying, or it sounds a little bit morbid. It was really difficult with friends because I was no longer the friend that they once thought I was, in the sense of, with a lot of my friends, we bonded over food. One summer, I went to Cold Stone ice cream. I kid you not, every single day. Like, I was obsessed with ice cream and, with not being able to eat dairy, like, I literally couldn't eat it anymore. And so, because I had had this obsession with ice cream and sweets in general, my friends always thought of me when it came to those foods. And so whenever they were craving those foods, they would call me and be like, hey, do you want to go get ice cream? Or, hey, I know you really love Italian food. Do you want to go to this Italian restaurant? And it's like, it was so painful in just knowing that I was changing as a person, and specifically in the foods that I was eating. And I was constantly being reminded of the fact that I am no longer the person that you think I am. I no longer like the food that you think I like. And interestingly, in that, I felt so misunderstood. I mean, it really just sent me into a time of just feeling misunderstood. And because everyone was moving so fast around me and they were so focused on their own things, that understandably so, they would forget about this giant change I was making in my life. And so, when I would get invited to these big group dinners, if my whole friend group was going to dinner and they chose an Italian restaurant, if they chose a hole in the wall Italian restaurant that has such good food, I could only get a salad at these restaurants. And literally at this time, like, nothing would kill me more than only being able to eat a salad. Like, it would make me mad. It would make me so mad. And so, I started to have to remove myself from these situations. And because of that, when I would decline these invites from friends, I would try and communicate the fact that, like, for my own well-being, I cannot be around these foods. Not only can I not eat them, but like, it is physically and mentally, emotionally painful for me to be around the foods that I cannot eat right now. And, some friends like were really understanding of that, but other friends like absolutely fucking hated me for it. That was just a really difficult energy to be around when I was making such incredible changes in my life. It's like every single day was a new win for me. It was like, oh my God, this is another day under my belt where I'm not eating the foods that are making me feel sick. And oh my God, I'm feeling so much better. Oh my God, I have energy after I eat food. Oh my God, I feel like I am mentally clear. My stomach isn't hurting. Oh my God, I have so much energy now. It's like, I felt like I was becoming a revitalized version of myself, because I was also getting a bunch more sleep. And, I was fully transforming, but it was so painful to be around people who fucking hated me for the change. And, just to be frank, like, that led to a falling out with my roommate. It led to, a falling out with a couple other friends. Like, these people just dropped off. And it was painful though. It was so painful. And so if you're sitting there and you're thinking of the changes that you want to make, and you're like, Oh my God. Like, this could potentially ruin some friendships. I think that's all part of the journey because, if I think about the friendships that I lost, and like, if those people are watching this, like, hi, but in no disrespect, but like, as I've been on the other side of that transformation for years now, I mean, gosh, I think it would have been like 2018 that I cut out all of these foods. Those friends that I lost were not meant to be with me in the past like 6 years. I've just gone through so much change, and that the whole changing of my diet, changing of my lifestyle, that was such a profound change that it makes sense that people would fall off, because I think what I was mirroring back to them were the things within themselves that they don't like, or the areas of themselves that they're avoiding, or the parts of their lives that they're avoiding. And I think that got really uncomfortable for them to look in the mirror on. So it didn't have anything to do with me making the change in my own life. It was how they felt about me making the changes and what that meant for them. What did me making change in my own life say about them? Like, that was the mindset that they were coming at it with. So of course, if you come at it from that mindset, and if you're the person who's not making any change and you're constantly witnessing somebody else making change, it's understandable that you might build resentment. So yeah, that's something that, I really, really had to face. It was so painful, but really all of this is like prioritizing yourself so much, and learning to prioritize yourself and building that trust within yourself. And if you're sitting here and you're like, I don't feel like I can help myself, think about all the little micro moments in your life of where you have helped yourself, because I'm sure there are some. For example, I gave the example earlier about fashion, right? Like, if you notice that the clothes you're wearing like don't fit your vibe anymore, or they're looking dingy or dull, or you just don't resonate with them, and you're like, once you notice it, you're like quick to jump on and like order new clothes, or like get a whole new vibe together. That's one way you're capable of helping yourself. Also, I think about if you're ever feeling really overwhelmed, and you take some time, you carve out time in your day to go on a walk, and maybe you sleep in and then you go on a walk when you're really, supposed to be working, but you've had such a long week and you just need that time for yourself mentally. That's another instance of you being able to help yourself. On that note, I think if you're sitting here and you're like, God, I really just want to make a change, even through like me sharing my story, I just hope that you see that any change is possible. And these are the different sorts of methods that I've put in place. And I just hope that this gives you a lot of inspiration or ideas of like what different methods that you can put in place in order to create the change. Because I think, when we think about change, it can feel like such a daunting thing. It can feel like a mountain that we have to climb. But if we can figure out the foundation and the tiny, tiny steps needed to get there, that mountain is going to feel a lot more like a hill. And slowly over time, you can make it up and over the mountain and onto the other side of change.